I do tend to think, right, that this is, there's nothing that's complicated that you could say that's true that's related to it, but that what's going on right now in Gaza and the U.S. support for that and all of that, I do think it's really, really bad. And, and I do tend to, I'm sure you've seen, that old clip of, Michael Brooks, from a few months before he died, when somebody sort of challenges him on this, and he gives this explanation of why he says, he doesn't actually find the sort of basics of this morally complicated. And that is very much how I see it. And I know it's not at all how you see it. Right. And
let me just tell you, why don't we just start with not assuming what the other person thinks, and I can kind of tell you what I think. So,
okay. I should say my impression was that's not how you see it.
Oh, and okay. Sure.
That's why I wanted to have you on, because, I've seen you say lots of things that make me think we're on pretty different pages about this. And since, I didn't want to do like a, snippy Twitter argument, I've always, like all of my interactions with you ever have always been good. I don't have any bad feelings about you. Right. Like, we just disagree about some stuff. So I wanted to explore that, like, in a conversation like this.
Well, so let's get into it. Let me just tell you from 30,000 feet where I'm kind of coming from with this. So, perfect. I think before this, I would probably have called myself more leaning towards Palestine before October 7th, right? I had never really thought about it. Like, I didn't have any animosity towards, my Jewish friends I worked with on the left. I just, just being in progressive spaces, I had heard so many things that just, like free Palestine, it's apartheid, it's an ethno-state, all that kind of stuff. And, when this started, I really found myself starting to dig very deeply into this. And the thing I find about trying to really dig into Israel-Palestine is, you go into the Balfour Declaration or Sykes-Picot or the League of Nations mandate system or the Peel Commission or the way they set the borders in 1948. You keep going down and down and down through it. And every single time you peel back a layer, it is amazingly complicated. I mean, just take the most basic fact of 1948. Like, I understand the argument with the Nakba. I think it's a fine argument. I'm probably personally more on the side of that. But Israel has, like, the way they see it as, like, the war of Israeli independence, right? So I just feel like at every step of this, we are falling into the dumbest possible conversation. And the reality is, like, both sides of this have some really legitimate grievances. We don't even talk about the terrorist attacks that Israel has just endured nonstop since the Second Intifada. And even though I'm very, very, very strongly against the way they are prosecuting this war, because it reminds me so much of 9/11 and the mistakes we made in the aftermath, I at least understand where they're coming from with this. And I don't see any charitability or even a willingness to understand Israeli foreign policy on my own side. And that's very troubling.
Okay. So you said a few things there that I think really show where we're coming apart. And,
sure.
So I do just want to highlight two of them real quick. Right. So Please. One of them is that, you like when you say, okay, well, it's very complicated. Once you start digging into the 1947 partition plans, go back, the Peel Commission and the mandate system, and my view on this is that I don't think you really have to in order to kind of see what's like kind of fundamentally unjust about the situation, right? Like, in other words, that whatever is true about, the Peel Commission and the British mandate and all of that, it would nevertheless be the case that it's not okay to rule over people who don't have citizenship rights in your country, that it's not okay to deny, refugees the right to come back, et cetera. And that it would still be the case, right? Those kind of words and, that you mentioned, right? You said like apartheid, ethno-state, all that stuff, that, like, I think that, like, the sort of accuracy of those, I don't really think depends on anything necessarily being true in the 20s or 30s or 40s. I think that it's just a matter of describing, contemporary realities. So, for example, if you are a Palestinian on the West Bank, right? So, I mean, like, leaving aside Gaza for a second, which is actually much worse, but like, even if you're Palestinian on the West Bank, then if you spent, like, if you're, say, 50 years old now, you spent every day of your life living under the rule of a country where you can't vote the people who rule you out of office, where if you're accused of a crime, you're tried in a military court rather than a civilian court, where you need the permission of the authorities to move around over like very short areas of time, etc. Whereas if you are a Israeli settler on the West Bank, then none of those things are true for you, right? You have all of the rights of any other Israeli citizen, and you're treated for every purpose as living in Israel. I do actually think apartheid is a pretty fair way to describe that situation, whatever is true of the complexities of the earlier history. And then just one really quick point, and then I'll just throw back to you, right? Which is just, when you set this up and you were describing, your kind of past pro-Palestinian views, you said, well, you didn't have any animus towards, Jewish people that you knew, but like that, I don't even see those as being linked, right? Like I don't think that like having, that, I mean, just because somebody shares the same ethnicity as a foreign state that is committing atrocities, that like, I don't think acknowledging those says anything bad about people who share that ethnicity. In fact, look, lots of people have, as right, like many Jewish people agree with, with everything I think about this, right? Like this, it's not like there's some sort of Jewish, collective point of view about the entire thing. And I just, that doesn't really seem to me like a helpful way of thinking about it. What am I missing?
Okay. This is so overarching. It's hard because we've just we've gone through okay, you offered a perspective on pretty much the formation since 1948 that I'm not sure I totally agree with, but I think that would be a rabbit hole we would go down. And before we started talking about this, we kind of said like maybe we should talk on more modern context, like what has happened since, say, the Camp David Accords and the Second Intifada. Maybe like kind of just starting really simple. Why don't we just like start talking about what's happening right now? Right.
Yeah.
And I think the broadest.
Yeah. Okay.
Please. Well, the broadest thing I would say with this,
right? I mean, just to be really clear, I wasn't offering a perspective on everything since 1948. My perspective was just that you don't need to go back to the 40s and the 30s and the 20s in order to see the sort of that, like, for example, a word like apartheid fits the treatment of the Palestinians, or to see the sort of fundamental injustice of all of that. In other words, like, I'm not saying, oh, look at all this stuff about the history that shows this is true. I'm saying, no, just look at the present, right? Like, I
think you do, because look, I'm an engineer, and when I'm trying to debug code, a really fundamental part of debugging code is rechecking your base assumptions. And there's so many things baked into that, like, are the Palestinians, are the Israelis more responsible for what is directly happening, in Gaza right now? That's not a simple, like, even that, you're portraying it as if it's black and white in the history of who has authority in Gaza and how they got that authority. This is a tremendously long discussion to be had, even if you look at Arafat. And I mean, some of the ways that Palestinian leaders, I think, like, if there's any constant throughout the history, is that Palestinians' own leaders have failed them. They've turned for their own personal power time and time and time again at the expense of their people. And I think this is the same thing that Hamas is doing right now. So that is why it's important to me. What I think would be most helpful is if, like you said, we disagree on the Biden administration and what they're doing. I would really love to understand your perspective on that, because I think Biden has two constituencies. We have a very large Jewish constituency. And I think you correctly noted, not all of them are 100% pro-Israel, but a substantial number of them are. And they have, this is a policy they deeply care about. I spoke at the ADL conference just last week. They feel very strongly about this.
Yeah,
right?
people at the ADL conference certainly do, right? Because I mean, that's the most. Those are the most.
It's my experience here in Massachusetts, which is a pretty left-wing, like pro.
Sure, but if you're at an ADL conference, right? These are the most like. This is the most like, I mean, the essential purpose of the ADL is really much more than anything else precisely in order to promote this point of view on Israel, right? This is not.
I don't really agree with that. I've worked with them for a decade on many initiatives, most of which have nothing to do with Israel. So I really take issue with that. Extremism Center is excellent. It is leading on digital public policy.
It is certainly one of their central defining concerns, and they have the ADL has spent many years branding, like taking like very rapidly pro-Israel positions, branding anybody Jewish or otherwise who disagrees as an anti-Semite or a supporter of terrorism. I mean, like this is really a big part of the mission, right? So it's not to me saying like, oh, I went to an ADL conference and everybody was on this page. It's like, yeah, that's like a little bit like if I
worked with them for over a decade, and I want to tell you, I think that you're really selling short a organization and all the work they do for people of color and LGBT people and women. They have led the way on so many initiatives on digital extremism, on trying to direct law enforcement to understand hate crimes, that not just ones that happen to Jews, to understand hate crimes overall, to point policymakers towards better public policy, and to try to be aware of this extremism that I believe directly led to the rise of Donald Trump. So, I want to be honest and say I don't really follow the policy wing of, like the Israel wing of the ADL, because I just don't work with those people. But I think the digital and online spaces is primarily academics doing research, and I think you're really selling them short. I want to come back to Biden, though, because help me understand your objections about Biden, because I think he's trying to juggle two different constituencies. I think he's in a no-win situation. I think that he is dealing with a lot of statements that are not really true from the activist world if you really dig into them. And I literally don't understand what more you could want from him in this moment. Yeah.
I mean, so, okay, just real quick. Sure. On the ADL, I think that there are two things that are true, that there is a side of what they do that is what you're describing, right? That's about this domestic facing approach to because originally, the sort of founding purpose of it was, counteracting, anti-Semitism. They brought in this to racism in general. There is all this, everything you're saying, right? That is definitely a side of it, but there is also a side of the ADL, which is extremely important side of the ADL and what they've done over the decades, that is extremely aggressive, extremely militant, pro-Israel advocacy. And I think pretty much anybody who's going to be involved with the ADL is at least going to be okay with that, right? Because this is just a big part of what they do, right? Like, you're not going to get people who have like a wide range of views on Israel who are going to be working for the ADL.
I don't know if that's really true, but I think we can table that.
Okay, fair enough. So I also really don't want the question about how we see Israel and whether that they have whether words like apartheid are appropriate and apt, right? I really don't want to let go of that. But yes, on the Biden, I definitely want to come back to that. But on the Biden administration in particular, what more do I want them to do? Well, I think that Israel is engaged in the kind of atrocities in Gaza that would be fairly described as ethnic cleansing. I think that it's not, it doesn't fit the man on the street definition of genocide where you're trying to kill every single person. But I think the definition of genocide under international law I absolutely think that that it meets. And so while things like that are going on, right, while you have, for example, millions of people, certainly many hundreds of thousands who have been intentionally starved, while you have a bombing campaign that's displaced 1.9 million, at least, of the 2.3 million residents from their homes, which is just like an apocalyptic level of a war crime. That, yeah, what more do I want him to do? At the very least, not rush weapons to the country that is carrying out those atrocities, not provide the weapons from which to carry out those war crimes, and certainly not to do things like veto ceasefire resolutions 3 times at the United Nations.
Okay, so I want to go through this one at a time.
Sure.
First thing, when we talk about international law, this is driving me, like, respectfully, Ben, this is driving me crazy with everybody on every side, because people talk about international law like it is a very easy thing to look up and apply, and it is not. It is so freaking complicated. The standards of what is international law, how the ICJ rules on different things, the standards that are being brought with this South African case, where the standard of them meeting that is just the possibility of these things happening. When you really dig into, hold on, let me just finish.
Okay,
when you really dig into international law, people are making statements, just these blanket statements, like it meets this definition. And I have to tell you, I think it is almost always an overstatement. So that's just a trend that I have noticed. Coming back to Biden, people talk, this is another thing where the facts are just inconvenient for people. This is the way that we have structured support for Israel in this country, as best as I can understand it. And it's worth saying a lot of these emergency bills that they pass do not come to the light of day. They don't get reported on. And I can't tell you this in totality. But the general gist of what we have is Obama passed a memorandum of understanding about a decade ago, offering a ton of aid to Israel. This is where the overwhelming majority of it comes from. This had a lot of provisions in it for us to share, like cybersecurity expertise, for us to train troops together. And it contains a lot of provisions for American weapon manufacturers to sell things to Israel. This is not us giving Israel tons of munitions. This is them agreeing to buy them from American weapons manufacturers, which to me really reads as this play that American weapons manufacturers have made to the right and the left to make sure they get rich no matter what. The second thing that happened is, as you go forward in time, all of our different presidents have authorized emergency measures to sell weapons. You had Trump, he did a supplementary bill. It wasn't as big as Obama's. It was I think about 1/10 of that. You had Biden before October 7th that did the same. And then he has authorized, I do believe, 2 additional weapon sales at this point, and a bigger aid package for Israel is stuck in Congress. So when we're talking about the Biden administration, so Joe Biden is writing a check with American taxpayer money to go fund the hell out of Israel. I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm saying Twitter does it. It's just not true. It is a wild overstatement.
Okay, but I guess what I'm not getting out of all of that is why the fact that, yes, you have, clearly you're right that there are many previous presidents who've supported Israel in all of its wars, all of its periodic mowings of the lawn in Gaza, and have funneled lots and lots of U.S. support of various kinds to Israel. That's clearly true, but I guess I don't see what's exculpatory about that for what Biden is doing. I mean, at best, that seems like an everybody else is doing it defense, which I think everybody else can be wrong. I also think that this is what's going on right now is qualitatively worse than anything that was going on 10 years ago. So I think continuing it under those circumstances is even worse. Not that I loved anything that Obama was doing with regard to Israel at the time. And sure. I also think, especially just the distinction between giving and selling weapons doesn't really strike me as like getting to the core of what people, I think, rightly find so objectionable about this. You know, that if, sure. that if you have a state that's carrying out, like, in real quantitative terms right now, right, the worst atrocities that are going on anywhere in the world, the single 25 miles of the planet right now where it's most dangerous to be a child is Gaza.
Yeah.
They have, while atrocities on that scale are happening, I guess I didn't give them the weapons. I sold them the weapons. Isn't really.
That's not my point. That's not my point, Ben. You're missing my point. And I do hope we can return and spend some time talking about what's actually happening in Gaza and spend a lot of time with that. Because if you've got an argument against Israel, it's what's happening in Rafah right now. And I do want to talk about that. But I think the subject at hand is like the blame for Biden. So if you want to get super, super granular about what Biden has authorized, because you got to understand, he didn't have any, like when Obama was president and that original MOU was signed, he was not president, right? So what has happened is the weapon sales that have gone through, yes, it's a lot of the munitions that have been used in these bombings that have flattened Gaza, right? And, I guess good news is Israel has no confidence that they will be able to buy those from America in the future. And they're actually building their own factories right now to build those giant bombs themselves. And they will source all the elements of that from Russia or China or whoever they need to do. But they're just going to go in and start building those bombs themselves. So if you're worried about long-term policy of the United States providing those bombs, they don't have any faith that we're going to sell them to them, because of the political climate here in the United States. But if you want to get really granular, the emergency weapon provisions that Biden has authorized for Israel, the overwhelming majority, as best as I'm able to tell, is for the Iron Dome. Do you have an issue with the Iron Dome, with Hezbollah firing missile after missile after missile at Israeli civilians? Because I don't. I want Biden to sell those munitions for that.
Well, it's certainly not just the Iron Dome.
It's not, but the majority of those weapon sales were to replenish the Iron Dome. To be clear, look it up, fact check me. I invite you.
I'm not dispute.
Sure.
So they have but the point is that it's certainly not just that. It is certainly the case that those weapons authorizations, and by the way, just the sort of general year after year after year massive military assistance that was happening in the background, right? Like even before the original supplemental thing for the Iron Dome.
The MOU.
Never mind everything that's happened since October 7th, the 100 weapon sales that have happened in the last 5 months. That quite a bit of that is in fact literally providing the weapons that are used. Things like the 2,000-pound bombs that, like, there was an early New York Times report, well before. You talk about Rafah, and I agree that's appalling, but also, but also I think that, that long before that, right? Like that's like if this wasn't happening, right? If it had ended, a month before Rafah was an issue, I would still think that these were really serious, really massive atrocities that had happened. Like that figure that I gave you earlier, about 1.9 out of 2.3 million Palestinians, being displaced from their homes in Gaza, right? That happened, that happened before that, right? So I think that if you have, I think under those circumstances, right, I think it is really, really bad to provide, whether you're giving, selling, like regardless of how it's being provided, right? I think that being the provider of weapons to a state that's carrying out really serious atrocities does seem to be very bad just as a general proposition. And I don't actually think you need to get that granular just to see that.
Okay, so I am going to agree with you, and I'm going to disagree with you. And to kind of like, I think, how did you feel immediately after 9/11? Like, I didn't have any issue with us initially, like trying to, go into the mountains of Tora Bora to, get Osama bin Laden and to try to pressure the Taliban to do that, right? Initially, my objection to it came like 6 months later when it's like, oh my God, the Bush administration doesn't know what the hell it's doing. This is not going well. And then instantly, like I was opposed to Iraq, right? Like you would not, like you don't have I don't want to put words in your mouth. Like you agree that Israel had a right to like a right to like strike back after October 7th. Yes.
So on Afghanistan, no.
Well, no, I'm talking about Israel.
No,
Israel.
yeah, sure, but that was the first thing you said, right? So I just don't want to.
Really, you don't think we had a right to go get Osama bin Laden? Really?
Well, I mean, they get the 20-year, the longest war in American history.
100%. I'm talking about the first few weeks. I'm 100% opposed to Afghanistan, to be clear. I literally got put on the terrorist watch list protesting that war so much, just to be clear. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that the idea that in order to, to get Osama bin Laden, you had to cluster bomb, invade, and occupy an entire country, I think was always pretty implausible. And I think that the fact that, when we eventually did in fact get Osama bin Laden, right? That was not even in Afghanistan. It was
Bush did not run that war well.
It didn't involve invading Pakistan where he was, right? They have I think all else being equal, sure, if you have that, if you have like some sort of extremely targeted raid to get Osama bin Laden. I mean, I'm not crying any tears for Osama bin Laden. They have I would, we can get into what exactly I maybe think should have happened there, but just in very general terms. And similarly, I think if you'd had some sort of incredibly targeted raid to get particular planners of 10/7 in Qatar, that's that the sort of do the equivalent of the post Munich stuff. I'm not that bothered by that either, although I will also say that I think that it's really misleading, and I guess this is where I do think that history becomes important. It is really misleading to portray to start the clock at 10/7, right? 10/7, there were certainly atrocities that
you think Hamas had a right to attack on 10/7?
I don't think I said that. I think that
I must have misunderstood you. Yes.
I think it's wrong to start the clock there. I don't think that anything can justify killing hundreds of Israeli civilians, although similarly, I don't think that there's anything, that could justify killing tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians. And anything you say about the first one, you should be willing to say many times over about the second one. But also, I think that they have if you start the clock, I mean, just forget justification for a second, just talk about causation. If you're starting the clock on 10/7, I think that is incredibly misleading. That they have that the idea that given the sort of horror, the decades of horrors that Israel had been perpetrating in Gaza before 10/7, if you look at I know you want to say something, but let me.
I know I'm not trying to be polite. Yes,
make this very quickly, right? They have if you look at the stuff that that if you see that the particular atrocities that 10/7 was, and this is what Hamas said, right? Was in immediate retribution for that been happening that year, right? That sort of massive anti-Palestinian pogroms in the West Bank that had ended up driving out most Palestinian residents of an area that's about 10% of the West Bank, that had been happening last year before 10/7. If you look at, again, just everything that's happened in Gaza beforehand, I think starting the clock there and sort of saying everything was fine, the initial act of violence is 10/7, that just seems completely wrong and misleading to me.
See, but this is where it gets hard, Ben, because then you're going to go, okay, you can say, well, it didn't start on this. And then I'm going to go, well, the Israeli neighborhoods have been hit by, rocket attacks for decades. And then you're going to go back, and then we're going to end up like the Camp David Accords and the Second Intifada, and then the Israeli prime minister being assassinated. I mean, it goes back and forth. So first of all, I think it's a lot more complicated than, the Palestinians are just this victim of Israeli aggression. I mean, why aren't they buddy-buddy with Egypt? They've committed, Hamas has done a ton of terrorism against Egypt. This is the entire reason Rafah Pass is shut down. Right? Because you had Hamas that would not stop striking Egypt. And Egypt is like, whoa, we need security from these guys too. So I think it's completely not accurate to just act like Israelis, these oppressors, they're hammering on, the Palestinians. It's not true. And I want you to answer my question. Do you think Israel had a right to respond after October 7th?
Yeah, so I think I did answer that. I think that they have, but I'll rephrase my answer. I'm happy to do that. I also want to address the point about Egypt because I think it's really important. But they have as far as October, the post October 7th Israel goes. Again, I think if you had a targeted response against people who had planned the attacks, that was along the lines of, I gave the examples about, the Bin Laden raid or the post-Munich, Israeli assassinations. I don't know that that would have particularly bothered me. Although I also think that the reason why the fact that that 10/7 was just one event, and by the numbers, right, a very small event in a
small event.
Yes, by the numbers, a very small event. If we're going to grade on the curve of say, well, the current estimate for how many Israeli civilians were killed on 10/7 is about 695. They have civilians I'm talking about. They have they had 1,200 and some. That's like the command.
1,200. Most of them were civilians, from my understanding. I'll take your point as granted, just so we don't get off.
695 is most. You know what I'm saying. But anyway, they have yes, I think if you compare that to the mountains of tens of thousands of civilian corpses that have been racked up in the last 5 months, or certainly, what's happened in decades and decades before that, yes, I think that they have what this is it's horrible, it's inexcusable, but it is, relatively speaking, by the numbers, a relatively minor entry in a cycle of atrocities and counter atrocities.
Oh,
and so if you have if you're going to say, oh, well, didn't they have to respond to this? I think a reasonable question would be, well, okay, now that there has been the same thing now that there has been tens of thousands of civilians who are killed, hundreds of thousands of civilians who have been intentionally starved, millions of people who've been displaced from their homes, whatever it is that you think was acceptable as retribution, as a response after 10/7, question is, okay, well, what would be an adequate response to those crimes? And it seems like whatever it is, it's got to be on a much, much bigger scale. Now, I obviously wouldn't support that. I don't want to commit any atrocities, anybody to commit any atrocities against Israeli civilians, but I would like consistent standards.
But Hamas knows exactly what they're doing every time. Look, let's go back to Egypt, right?
Sure.
Israel and Egypt have not been friends. They may be moving towards normalization now, but around 1948, they were not really good friends, right? Israel was able to get peace with Egypt by overwhelming force and by frankly kicking their asses in a war. If you look at the history of this region, this is unfortunately the lesson that Israel has learned over and over and again. Someone in the region starts a war with them and they end up attacking with massively more force, and it ends up being this excuse for them to take a whole bunch more land. Sometimes they give it back, sometimes they don't. But this was, of course, everything that was going to happen. And what I find so frustrating about this analysis
but what do you think is going to happen as a result of it?
I think it's the cycle of violence. Like my core belief here is that the international community should reward. I think Palestinians historically are stronger when they have leaders and they are working towards peace, because you look at the conditions there, you look at the fact that, like, of course, people should be able to govern themselves. It seems to me historically, when they've pushed for peace, they are in the strongest bargaining position. When there's this push towards violence, civilians end up getting slaughtered. This is not the first time this has happened. And if you look at what's happening in Rafah right now, where's the part of the left that's holding Hamas accountable for this? Because if you look at why the ceasefire broke down, it's 100% on Hamas.
Okay, so I wanted to, because you've said the Egypt thing a couple times. I want to address that, and then I really want to talk about the last point that you just made. So about Hamas. So, on Egypt, yes, if you're talking about the 1940s or 50s or 60s or 70s, then that's true. But of course, this is why I think if you're grounded in what's happening in the 2020s, when it's been decades since since the sort of usual picture that you get in, the Israeli, I'm trying to come up with a better word than apologist here, but I'm just going to go with that because I'm not being creative. That like worldview, right? Sort of likes to portray it as in the sea of enemies, and this has been very, very far from the case for several decades. That you have the reality of the last several decades is much more Israeli security cooperation with various despots near it than it is. In most cases of
which is like everywhere in the Middle East, by the way. That's a lot of people in that region. Yes,
sure. I'm just saying, like, it is not really the case that it is in the sea of enemies, and it has not been for a very long time. And they have and certainly in the Egyptian case, if you're, if anything that's since 1978, right? The Egypt is one of the biggest, recipients. I mean, I know it was
number 2.
Some of this was, of U.S. aid, precisely right in order, not just because of this, but like this is definitely one of the reasons, right? Precisely in order to make sure that they are going to do things like, cooperate with what Israel does in Gaza. That this is part of the, this is. Like, again, this is why ever since that 1978 peace treaty, they have gotten this massive amount of U.S. aid. This is why the U.S. Pretty openly supported in the Obama years a military coup against the elected government in Egypt, because thought that the Egyptian military would be a sort of more reliable partner for various kinds of regional security reasons, which definitely include what its attitude towards Israel is. So I think like sort of treating Egypt's role in the blockade of Gaza before 10/7 or any of that as if it's some sort of independent evidence of something, or it's like, oh, see, it's not just Israel, or there's the that like, oh, why don't other Arab countries like them or whatever. No, this is a close U.S. ally that gets all this aid that it would not get if it didn't act like this. And then I just wanted to, like, really quickly, because the last thing you said was about Hamas, and they have on Hamas. I would just like to say, I mean, we say, oh, where's the part of the left that's holding Hamas accountable? It's like, well, look, this is to me like saying, where's the part of the left that is holding Osama bin Laden accountable? I mean, there's I don't know what our mechanisms of accountability are supposed to be for Hamas. I mean, I can't,
because we are actively cheerleading the people trying to destroy Hamas. There are large parts of the left. They're trying to basically pressure us to stop that war against them. I mean, I know it's,
that's like saying,
yeah.
I mean, which I'd certainly. I have no brief whatsoever for Hamas. Hamas is terrible, but but to me, this is like saying, oh, well, in 2003, as I was going to anti-war protests about the Iraq war, what am I doing to hold Saddam Hussein accountable? Nothing, right? Because there's nothing that an American could do to hold Saddam Hussein accountable, just like there's nothing an American can do now to hold Hamas accountable. Now, if the United States was Yeah. They have if the United States was funneling, hundreds of billions of dollars in aid/sales of weapons to Hamas.
Funneling?
Funneling.
What does funneling mean in this context?
Providing.
It makes it sound like it's illegal. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I cheerfully withdraw the word funneling. Nothing rests on it, I promise you. Right? Like they have a providing. If the United States was providing hundreds of billions of dollars of military aid to Hamas every year, if the United States had provided,
we kind of are actually. We are kind of doing that.
The weapons that Hamas used to carry out 10/7. If Biden was going over to meet with Hamas leaders and give press conferences with Hamas leaders, and both parties competed to show how much loyalty they had to Hamas, I would absolutely go to some anti-Hamas protests. Because I don't think that we should do that. And similarly, I don't think we should do that with the state that is carrying out far greater scale atrocities than anything that Hamas could hope to do.
Okay, so two things. There's coming back to Egypt, and then I want to talk about, because we do fund Hamas in many ways. So first of all, I don't agree with your characterization at all that Israel's the number one recipient of foreign aid. And it's true that Egypt is number two. That is just true. That is a really sketchy claim that the primary reason we do that is so we can tell them what to do with Israel. I don't think I said primary. I think I said one of the reasons. I don't think that's true. Maybe it's something like when I think about what the national security benefits are to us, like making sure stability with Egypt. Like first, we spend a lot of resources on general like geostability throughout this region. We need partners. I think you can look at Operation, what is it called? Infinite Resolve that's going on right now against the Houthis. We need intelligence. There's a ton of, please. Yes.
Sure. So, and I want to let you say your whole thing. So I'm just going to say
go ahead.
20 seconds this and then shut up for a couple of minutes. But I have but I think it is undeniable, right? Like, and this is just like put as neutrally as possible. It is undeniable that if you look at, U.S., like interest, whether or not you think it's really in our interest or whatever, right? What the U.S. supports, what it cares about, right? In the Middle East, right? Then what goes on with Israel is not very low on that list, right? It's pretty high on that list. If you look at like the number, if you look at the amount of aid, as you just said, that the U.S. gives to Israel, if you look at the sheer number of times when the U.S. has exercised its Security Council veto, it's on behalf of Israel, etc., right? Like this is clearly a pretty high U.S. priority in the Middle East. I think that's just like a nice, neutral, true statement that I have a really hard time imagining anybody disputing that. And if you accept that, then it's like, yes, of course. If you're looking at why the United States funds Egypt, gives all this aid to Egypt, well, if we want Egypt to do things that comport to American foreign policy priorities in the Middle East, that list is going to include Israel, and it's going to be pretty high up the list.
I don't know. Maybe, I fully admit I am ultimately an institutionalist, right? Like I go into politics because I believe in our country, and like one of the lessons I took protesting the Iraq War, exactly like you did, is that I personally have a responsibility to do what I can to make sure that the diplomatic process is what we focus on in the State Department, rather than just going through the barrel of a gun. So the way I look at this foreign aid, which I think you may not agree with, I don't see it as, we got to give all the money to Israel. Although I do think there are a lot of American Israelis who participate in our democratic process and donate money to politicians and make it clear that the policy they want is for our country to stand with Israel. And then I think that is the democratic process playing out. Although I think we'd both agree we want dark money out of politics. But I look at this like Israel is the only democracy in the region. You have a whole bunch of failed dictators. You've got Yemen just next door with the civil war with the Houthis and the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world, which before the last few weeks it was at least before Gaza. You have us investing massive resources in trying to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, just so you can have a little bit more stability. You have Iran and their entire axis of resistance with Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas that are basically poking every single little hole they can find in the West's defenses to try and destabilize the region. So I look at this and I'm like, I just see this as like the United States very generously trying to play a part in stabilizing this part of the world and also making sure shipments are going to continue through the Suez Canal. So I think there's a bigger national security picture that you're minimizing. I don't think it's just about Israel.
Well, I think I was pretty careful to say that I didn't think it was just about Israel. But what I said, and I guess I'm still a little unclear about which part of this you're disagreeing with, right? What I said is if you look at what the United States priorities seem to be in the Middle East, right? Israel is definitely on that list, and it's not very low down that list, right? Like I think that those things, that just seems straightforwardly. Both of those things seem very straightforwardly.
I think that's fair,
right?
I mean, they're a top partner. That's fair.
Like what you said. Like it seemed like part of what you were saying was maybe an argument to justify, right? Like that being the case, right? But
I feel like there's this
line
that we're dumping tons of money towards Israel, and I think it's just a lot more complicated than that.
Okay. I mean, you understand my objection to USA to Israel is not like fiscal conservatism, right? Like
yes,
it's not.
Yes.
It's that like I disagree about the justification, both in general and especially right now, right? So in general, because what you just said about it's being the only democracy in the Middle East. I mean, even apart from, you could say, yeah, they have elections in Lebanon and whatever, there are plenty of undemocratic.
It's going great in Lebanon right now.
Sure, it's not going great, right? But on that very minimalist standard of democracy, whereas it does seem to me that like I actually wouldn't agree, right? That Israel is a democracy, because I think a very basic condition of counting as a democracy, right, is that the people that live within the borders of your state get to get democratic rights. They get to vote in your elections, etc. And it has been the case for the last 56 years that there are literally millions of people who live within Israel's borders, who again, who do not have those rights, if you are an Israeli who lives in a Jewish settlement in the West Bank, then which by the way is about, depending on which numbers you're looking at, is something like 5 to 10% right now of the overall Israeli Jewish population. But if you are one of those people, you are considered for every legal purpose to live in Israel, right? You are treated as somebody who is a resident of Israel, not as somebody who's abroad. Whereas if you are in the same city down the road from a settlement, again, you can't vote in elections. If you're accused of a crime, you don't get a real trial. You get a military trial. And this has been the case for 56 years. It is the stated position of Israel's current government that it will always be the case that there could never ever be a separate Palestinian state. And this is, so it seems to me that if within the sort of borders of that state as it currently exists, you have millions and millions of people who don't have a right to vote, then that's not a democracy. And I think that this is like really like, I think could get to like one of the really core disagreements, because I think if you say that like whatever historical story that you want, that you would endorse about about what happened at Camp David, or what happened with with at Taba or et cetera, right? What I would just say is, let's say, for the sake of argument, right, that you could, that Israel's governments were completely blameless and I know that's not even what you think.
I don't think so.
But I'm making a very specific point here, right? So it's like, I know this goes way beyond what you think, but if you think, for the sake of argument, that Israel's governments were, completely serious, we're completely blameless, right, about the lack of a two-state, solution over the decades, that it was, 100% the fault of, Yasser Arafat and his successors and various other people. Even if you think that, right, say, okay, well, look, one, I don't think that justifies, not, withdrawing from these territories, even unilaterally in that case. Or two, I think that if for some reason a two-state solution is impossible, like let's just say it's impossible, if it was impossible, that if there was nothing that Israel could have done, that, because too many just Palestinians just being too intransigent, even if you accept that, which I mean, as you would imagine, is about the furthest thing from what I actually do think about that history. We can always talk about it, right? But even if you accept that, right, I would say, okay, well, if you can't have a two-state partition, then that doesn't mean that you're justified in continuing to rule over people for decades without giving them equal rights. I think if it's the case that you can't do a two-state partition, then you would have no choice, if you want to be a democracy, other than to extend the vote to all those millions of people.
So first of all, I am 100% for a two-state solution, and that's why I'm so frustrated that the Palestinians have rejected their own state for turn after turn after turn. I feel like we need to schedule like a 4-hour discussion on Israel-Palestine, because I feel like I keep wanting to go down these roads, and then you talk and I want to go down different roads. So just a couple of things.
Sure.
My understanding of the Israeli law around how my understanding of Israel itself is there are no laws or policies that treat different races inside Israel any differently, and that most of the different treatment comes through their immigration policy, which countries have their own right to set who gets in and gets out, right? The nation state law creates no legal distinctions between citizens, as I understand it, and I think it's really important to contrast this with Gaza, where there are just no Jews at all. So, I really want to be honest and say I'm not really understanding this argument that Israel is not a democracy, because it is a place with 20%, a 20% Arab population, many of whom were just the people in 1948 that didn't participate in, the war to slaughter their Jewish neighbors, right?
Well, neither did almost any of
them.
the
They lived there and stayed in their homes. So, but I want to come back to a point you made a while ago that I was not able to latch onto, where you're like, well, there's no policy that we can do to dissuade Hamas. Yeah, I think this is really deeply untrue, because if you look at the way that that Hamas has spent the aid that we've given them. I urge people to go look at pre-war what the standard of living was like in Gaza with the aid that we've sent there. It's actually comparable in many ways, like infant mortality, access to food, life expectancy, to other countries in the region. I was shocked by this. I urge you to go look it up. But the thing is, I believe that they have a $150 million military budget, and 40% of it has gone to building tunnels, which makes the targeted attacks you were talking about earlier so impossible. You look at the way that the international community funds the schools, and anyone out there can go look at TikToks of Palestinian children being radicalized and taught to hate the Jewish people next door, which of course propels the cycle of violence and rockets being sent into Israel. So there are all kinds of things we can do here. I think generally speaking, it's important to remember Bush is the one that pushed for that election in 2005 where Hamas came to power. We bet on that. That was a really bad bet. And we're also the people that took out the buffer state between, we took out Iraq. So now Iran is basically unchecked in this entire region, and they are the ones funding the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah, which are conducting all these strikes. So, in many ways, it's our policy. There's so much that we could be doing to stabilize this area and put pressure on Hamas to actually stand up for the people.
Yeah, so I think that okay, so there are 2 points here. One
Please.
is what I said was that I don't think American citizens have any leverage over Hamas. In other words, Hamas is not being supported by the United States. It is an enemy of the United States. That makes it in a structurally different position than what American allies being supported by being supported by the United States are doing, right? That they have so the question of like, why isn't the left, right, which notably is not in power, right? Like, why isn't the left doing something to hold Hamas accountable? I think that the purpose of a protest is to try to change government policy, right? That there isn't something that you could protest that the United States is doing for Hamas. In fact, the United States, again, see above, is providing weapons and diplomatic cover for atrocities at a totally blood-curdling scale that are being committed in the name of getting rid of Hamas. But the other point I wanted to make is that when you say that, you don't understand how I can say that Israel is not a democracy when Israeli Arabs in most ways have equal rights. And I think that, I gave you the reason for thinking it, right? And it wasn't about the Israeli Arabs, right? I don't think that anything that was true about the Israeli Arabs could, negate the argument that I was making, which is that for the last 56 years, there has been all this territory that has been absorbed into Israel for every possible legal and practical purpose other than giving citizenship and voting rights to the Palestinians who live there. That you have people who are Israeli settlers who live in the West Bank. And if you look at their rights and you look at the rights of everybody else who lives in the West Bank, I do think that the word apartheid is a fair description of that reality. And I do think that they have that it's not really the case that you get to say, well, we're a democracy, and sure, we've spent 56 years ruling over people who don't have citizenship or a right to vote in our elections, and it's currently our policy that we will always rule over them. That's our explicitly stated policy that we'll always rule over them. But we're a democracy because look at these other people who we did give citizenship to, back, many decades ago. I don't think that defense actually touches what the argument is. I would also just point out with regard to
can I ask a clarifying question, because I literally don't understand what you're saying.
Sure, but just while I'm thinking about it, right?
Go ahead.
With regard to immigration policies, you say, yeah, every country sets its own immigration policies. But as I think we would agree in the U.S. context, right, that that immigration policies can be extremely objectionable, and if you have explicit racial or religious discrimination in immigration policies, that's really bad. I think that's something we would agree in a U.S. context is really bad. And so I think if you say anybody who comes from the right ethno-religious background anywhere in the world has a right to come here, but we're going to prevent families of people who, in the vast majority of the cases, those 750,000 people who were driven out in 1948, vast majority of the cases, ordinary civilians, they have, as Israeli historians themselves have exhaustively documented, that people who are either fled from atrocities, their villages being destroyed, etc., or who just did what civilians have every right to do in every war, which is to flee the war zone with the understanding that, of course, they'll be allowed to go back to their homes when it's over. If you don't let those people come home for the very explicit reason, right? I have never met a Zionist who is shy about saying that this is the reason, right? That they have for the very explicit reason that no, if we allow refugees to come back, that would disrupt the demographic balance.
You believe in right of return?
Yeah, I think that yes, I think that right of return is something that follows from very basic liberal democratic principles that I strongly suspect you and I would completely concur on in any other context.
Sure. Okay, so we don't have that much time left. Man,
Sure.
There's so much here. I almost want to go down this path, though. It almost seems like you have a more right-wing position than I do, because I in the sense that are you telling me you consider Gaza to be part of Israel's territory, and that when they can't vote, you want you want a one state in this region, administered by Israel? Is that correct?
Well, administered by everybody who lives there, that they have that everybody should have equal democratic rights, which is something that generally speaking, people who support the Israeli status quo say, oh, that would be awful. That would be the end of Israel as a Jewish state. They equate that to destroying Israel. So look, this is what I
don't think you would have found a lot of support in America to bring in Al-Qaeda and
sorry, bring in what?
Bringing Al Qaeda and make them part of America. Tensions are a little bit high right now, But
the ultimate reason that's high, right? The ultimate reason why all the violence that's happened, that whole cycle of violence we were talking about earlier, the ultimate reason for all of it is that you have this, this 56 years of people who are living in the West Bank and Gaza under military occupation, who have who haven't done right. There are two things that you could do, right? If we agree on the absolute bedrock principle that no state has a right to rule in the long term over people who don't have citizenship rights in that state, that's just an absolutely not acceptable thing. That this is I don't see how a democratic principle could get more basic than that. If you agree with that, right, then you have either to do a two-state partition tomorrow, or you have to give everybody who currently lives under your rule citizenship rights. Those are your options. There is no third option that's consistent with that principle. And especially that if you say, well, and again, I'm not attributing this to you. I'm just making a much more general point, right? If you say, well, look, it would be great to have a two-state solution, but we can't because of reasons X, Y, and Z that are all the fault of different Palestinian leaders. Okay, if that's true, you got to give them citizenship, because you cannot rule over people, right? Not for 56 years, not for 1 year, right? You cannot rule over people who do not have democratic rights in your country. Every human being has a right to self-government. And if you were doing that, you're violating that right.
Sure. I hear you. I would like a chance to make a few points,
yes,
if
please.
I can do that.
Yeah,
because we don't have that much time left. And Ben, I really, really want to talk about what's going on in Rafah. I think you and I probably don't agree on one state versus two state. I would love to talk about it more.
Sure.
I want, everyone out there is listening to this, and I'm sure this will get picked up on the React channels. I really want you to pay attention to this part about what's going on in Rafah today, because it is a disaster. If you want to be angry at Israel about something, you should be angry about this. About a month ago, 500 trucks of aid were able to come through the single border that we have to provide humanitarian relief for, what has it been, 1.4 million people that have been displaced are now living there. It is a crisis. Today, the number, according to Wall Street Journal, if I'm remembering it correctly, has gone from 500 to about 120. It is absolute chaos. The Gaza police are not escorting these trucks, so they're being hijacked along the way. There's violence. The Wall Street Journal had a story that will break your heart. I really dearly urge you to go read it, about children out there, and the only food they've had to eat for days are lemons. Most people going to 2 meals a day. It's great that Biden is airdropping supplies. It is not a long-term solution. There's hopes that another pass for supplies is going to be opened up as early as Friday, but it's up to Israel. If you want to be angry at Israel about anything, be angry about this food situation, because it is the famine in Yemen was bad. What's going on in Gaza, if it will break your heart if you read about it. This is why, I will fully blame Israel for not letting enough food trucks through this. And I think it's very clear that Netanyahu is doing this for malicious reasons. But it's also true, and this is where the left is probably not going to want to hear this, that Hamas had a fantastic ceasefire on the table for us to take a pause and to make sure those civilians could get food, could get medical supplies, and we could take care of those kids. Hamas doesn't care how many Palestinian civilians die. They love it when civilians die because it is a helpful political tool for them. And I urge you to go read the reporting about why this ceasefire stopped. Hamas made the calculation that with Ramadan, that there was a unique moment for them to inflame anger at Israel, and that this was a really good point to break down these peace talks. And the things they're asking for are absolutely insane. Hamas will not give Israel a list of the hostages that are still alive. They won't even give them a list to let those families know if they're alive or dead. They are refusing to do that. Hamas is insisting on stuff that's just insane, like a right of return being baked into this ceasefire. And the way this stuff works historically is you have a ceasefire, and the military does this. Then you have trust building actions that are taken with it. So one side learns to trust a little bit, and the other side learns to trust a little bit, and then you move towards peace. That is the only way this is going to happen. But you should be so angry at Hamas too for using all these civilians as tools for a political agenda. It's not going to work. It's going to lead to so much human suffering. So what I do think is good is you can give Biden credit because he is putting a ton of pressure right now on Netanyahu. It was just reported today the bright lines that he's drawing in military aid to Israel. If Hamas does end up invading Rafah, Israel ends up invading Rafah, and that's good. So our government is taking very aggressive steps towards Israel to move towards this ceasefire. I think it's to Biden's credit.
Yeah. So I think that there's been no indication at any point from anybody in the Biden administration of any interest in a permanent ceasefire, as opposed to a 6-week pause in that will lead to just resuming the ethnic cleansing that's been going on for the last 5 months, very consistently. Even if you look at Kamala Harris, when she says, she makes a big show of saying, oh, there should be a ceasefire, everybody claps. And then she says, like the world's most ghoulish comedy routine, for 6 weeks. They have this is clearly not what people are talking about when they are demanding a ceasefire. And I think especially if you want to talk about the subject of drawing bright lines, I mean, you can look at the interview that Biden gave just the other day, right? It was post State of the Union, where he used the word red line, right? But or the interviewer rather, used red line, said, oh, would Israel going into to Rafah be a red line for you? And he said, yeah, but there's nothing that could happen that would make me cut off weapons, so Israel can't defend itself. That's not what a red line means. If you're saying that, yeah, it's a red line, but there's nothing that could happen that would make me cut off military aid, then what you're saying is that you have no red lines. And I think the report, if we're looking at the same one that you're talking about for today, strikes me as a pretty sad kind of, PR strategy through leaks where they say that, there are 4 people with knowledge of this who said that the president was thinking about conditioning, aid in the future. This is considering that, that his own words in public, in an interview just a few days ago were that there is nothing that Israel could do that would make me cut off military aid. I have to say, I'm very unimpressed by anonymous people saying, "Oh no, he's really thinking about it," and especially when you say that Biden's been working so hard at this. Biden has used none of the available leverage. In other words, if you are going to authorize, weapons transfers, that, then what you could do as leverage, you could say, I am not going to do that. Right?
Which he said he was considering today.
Okay, yes. Anonymous people said that he was thinking about it. His own public statement, like just within the last few days, is that nothing would make him do that, right? So, and then you can.
If I could just respond to this,
just a second, right? If you combine that with the emergency weapons transfers, if you combine that with vetoing 3 ceasefire resolutions, I think that all of that stuff, none of that tells me that there's a willingness to use any leverage whatsoever. And when you get to a point where you have that, using any leverage whatsoever, that you would have to actually say the opposite of what he said, that there's nothing that they could do that would make me cut off the aid. And when you get to a point where things have reached such an absurd pass that the U.S. is talking about building a temporary port that would take 60 days to even get up and running, because Israel is essentially sponsoring, protests to prevent aid from coming in. You have cabinet ministers repeatedly, praising the protests. You have the protests being allowed in the first place when they have no problem in it whatsoever using force to break up protests by even other Israelis, by families of hostages who are protesting in Tel Aviv in order to request a ceasefire. You have essentially a Israeli government sponsored protest to blockade aid from getting in. And when you get to the sort of heights of absurdity where the official U.S. government response is, well, maybe we'll build a port that it'll take us 60 days to build, and then we'll get some aid in that way, or we're going to do this, I'm sorry, very bad joke of aid drops that, even aside from the people who were killed by the aid drops, the aid drops that would provide one meal to a very small minority of the people who are starving. That is something that you do as a gesture. That is public relations. That is not a meaningful effort to do anything about.
You gotta let me jump in here, man.
I did let you go for a very long time. So let me just finish this up, right? That is not an effort to use to do meaningfully much of anything to counteract a policy of engineered mass starvation that's been very clear from the beginning when they announced, nothing comes into Gaza, that you have politicians and Netanyahu's own party get up in the Knesset and say it's very important that there be hunger in Gaza. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to find collaborators, and, our strategy wouldn't work. When you have, again, protesters being allowed, even as families of hostages are tear gassed in Tel Aviv, to do this, that we say, oh, well, maybe we'll do some token airdrops. Maybe we'll build a port that's going to take 60 days. This does not look to me, even in terms of that immediate humanitarian crisis, never mind the larger picture, that does not look to me like an administration that is exercising any meaningful leverage to stop this. But I want to give you the last word. Tell me why I'm wrong about it.
Okay. So first of all, Biden, you are not the only constituency in America. You're not. The majority of people stand with Israel and actually think I'm far too left on this, to be super clear. So, I mean, first of all, Biden is trying to balance multiple constituencies. I think that you are really, really underselling all the things that he has done. So first of all, our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who I think is one of the very best our country has ever had, especially compared to the Trump era, but even historically has done an amazing job. He is flying over there constantly. He's meeting with Palestinians. He's helping facilitate the talks of the ceasefire. Like, he has been amazing in pushing it. And there's so much effort looking at the left to like talk about these symbolic protest votes with the UN. Yeah, the UN doesn't decide the damn ceasefire. It's Israel and Hamas. They decide the ceasefire. So the United States is making a calculation that if they don't stand with Israel, it's going to lead to this situation. It makes the hostages more unsafe. You can read about that if you want to understand the reasons why we voted against that resolution. As far as the peer, I've not heard that 60-day number. I've heard that it would be much, much faster than that. But like this idea that the Biden administration has been sitting on its hands and doing nothing, I just flat out don't agree with that. I think, I talked to some of my Palestinian friends, and they have never seen more like effort and support from the United States government, where they have felt invisible for the longest time. Like, no one cared about their plight. And I think there is tremendous pressure. And I think Biden has done a really, really good job with that. Boy, there was so much, it was just a fire hose of stuff that I disagreed with. But I think I will probably just leave it there and say, I want to do this again. Maybe something a little bit more structured next time, so we don't get gallop around so much.
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to do that. That's, I wanted to do, something very informal and welcoming and friendly, since I think there is a lot of potential here for, it to not go that way. But if you want to do a third party platform with a moderator, I am down.
Just something with because I think both of us have a lot of knowledge around this, and we keep leaping around, and it's hard to like grab onto it and go down like lines of inquiry on any one point.
All right. Well, fair enough. I think that I would suggest people take a look at polling data about what past Biden voters say. But since I said that you'd get the last word,
no. This is your show, Ben. I would never try to take the last word. Yes.
Well, okay. I tried, right? I think that I really do routinely give people the last word, because I want to be a welcoming place where people can come on and disagree with me. But yes, I think that if you look at polling numbers about an immediate long-term ceasefire, if you look at poll numbers about Biden 2020 voters and how many of them think that what's going on rises to the level of genocide, I think that you would be surprised by the results. I think that there is a tremendous amount of popular anger. It's not fringe, and I think it's correct. I think it's justified. That's my position. But I am happy to you tell me what, where, when, how, and with what structure you want to do it next time, and we can do the 4-hour version. I'm perfectly happy to do that, but I also do genuinely appreciate that you came on to do this, because many people are not really willing to go to platforms where you have this level of disagreement, and I appreciate that you did, and thank you.
100%. I really enjoyed it. We'll do it again soon.
All right, sounds good. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.